Where have you been during the civil rights movement? Attorney Herbert Henderson has been in the front lines. I'm Dan Ringer, and I'll talk with Herb Henderson right now on The Lawworks.
The following is a production of West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
The Lawworks is made possible by the generous support of the West Virginia State Bar, the West Virginia Trial Lawyers Association, the Defense Trial Council of West Virginia, and by ALPS, providing protection and peace of mind for West Virginia attorneys and their clients for more than 15 years. And FindLaw, offering an online directory of more than 1 million attorneys, plus self-help legal guides for consumers and businesses. Find answers, find lawyers, find law on the internet at findlaw.com.
Recently, at the Greenbrier Resort in White Sulphur Springs, I had an opportunity to talk with one of the leaders of the civil rights movement. He was not only a leader in the movement in West Virginia, but in the nation. He was an officer in the Army when it was first integrated, and he was the first African-American graduate of the George Washington University College of Law. He served as acting general counsel for the NAACP and served as president of the West Virginia branch for 20 years. My guest is attorney Herbert Henderson. Mr. Henderson, you have been, I suspect through all of your life, active in the civil rights movement, and that included the civil rights movement in West Virginia at the time of the decision by the United States Supreme Court in Brown versus Board of Education. Can you tell us what led up to that? Was that a decision that was inevitable?
I think that's very true. The time frame we have, the decision actually was in 1954, and I can tell you a little story about that because I was overseas at the time, a first lieutenant out of West Virginia State College of an artillery battery. I was the boss guy there, and we got old newspapers. In about June, I was in North Korea as an Army officer, and I got a hold of the New York Times, and it had this stuff about Brown versus the board. It had headlines and all kinds of things, and we got the newspaper. At that point, I had already made up my mind that even though I would have to take a lot of science courses, and I was going to go to med school, I read that paper, special edition. I read it over and over. And doing that, I had a vision at that time. I said, forget being a doctor. I'm going to be a lawyer. And then I came back and entered into law school in 1955, and that's how I ended up. So I really wasn't a part of that. And after I finished school, I came back home to West Virginia from McDowell County from GW, and I decided to spend my life with the NAACP to try to reach out and help people. And I never had a goal as a lawyer to ever dream about making any money. It didn't really matter. And some of the cases that I've learned the most about and most proud of, I never received one nickel. And I'm proud, very, very proud of it. And in my civil rights, I've done things for women, for Caucasians. It really didn't matter to me. Client's a client, as you well know.
What was it about Brown that caught your attention?
Well, I was familiar with what had happened after I think at that time, all of us African Americans, we knew about Plessy versus Ferguson. We just knew about it. The separate but equal doctrine was propounded. Now, actually, the Dred Scott decision basically said African Americans were not citizens. They were not even people for a long period of time.
Dred Scott was an escaped slave who was captured
in one state and went back to, he went into a free state and he came back. They filed a case in court, and they basically held that he didn't have any rights in court or anywhere else.
He was just basically a bale of cotton.
That's right.
Returned.
He was not and Plessy versus Ferguson espoused a theory that we can have it separate and equal. So it's okay to discriminate. It was the beginning of apartheid in America. We had legal apartheid in America through the judicial system and through the legislative system from 1896 until 1994. America had apartheid. There's no such thing as separate but equal. For example, I grew up in McDowell County, and I played football, and I did some other things. But in a black school, we had, for example, you talk about equal but separate but equal. We were so happy when that white high school would give us their football uniforms after they used them 2 years, because they would be pretty good for us. They weren't going to buy any for us. We used the shoes that the white kids had used for 2 years, and we'd get them. We'd get their books, we'd get stuff. They'd tear it up, but we were so glad to get it. That's what you call separate but equal kind of education that a lot of us had in terms of books and the things that you had. But we had other things that helped us, a great set of teachers and other things that helped. So there's no such thing in school, the school system, as separate but equal. And even though you may have a school or anything else, to force a beautiful little black chocolate girl to go into a restaurant or something like that, and knows that she has to go there because of the color of her skin, it warps her for her entire life just to be a part of it. So we're talking about sociological things rather than the physical schools as much, although my emphasis at that time was to get good new books and to get good football uniforms, even though we had to take them from the white kids in McDowell County. And that's true. We reminisce, old-timers in the African-American community, how we got the clothes, or the uniforms, I should say, from the white schools, and we were glad to get them. Or, for example, in McDowell County, where I live, both schools, the black school and the white schools, were about the same distance. And the white kids would be bused. We both were bused. The blacks were picked up at about 5:30 or 6, and they would take us in the dark to the black school. Then you go back, you turn around, come back to the same communities in the upper part of McDowell County, Mayberry, and those places, and you would pick up the white students. They're going to go same place. And I started figuring that out, Then in the afternoon, the school let out about 3:30, I think, at that time. White kids went home, right?
On the school buses.
Right, and we waited. And when they come back and get us. By the time they got us and got us home, it's dark in just about. And I always wondered about that. And I asked my dad one time. I said, well, Dad, why couldn't they just have the white kids around here on this side of the bus and the blacks, and we wouldn't have to get up like 2 hours early and get home late? He said, oh, boy, that's just the way it is. And I said, I didn't understand it, but I really didn't. But there's no such thing. And when you take the mind of somebody at an early age, at the age of 2 or 3 or 4, and you teach them that they're inferior intellectually and all other ways, that's with you for life.
That causes damage.
Total damage. That's what the Supreme Court's case was about, of course. It's a sociological decision. There were 30-some sociologists who gave papers to the Supreme Court in support of the Brown decision. Every psychologist, a social worker in America who were experts all agreed that what the damages of going to a separate school and being changed different.
I believe during the 60s, all of the states in the Deep South will come to see the futility of resisting the Supreme Court's desegregation decisions, and while we will not have complete integration by 1970, we will at least be moving on towards some form of compliance, even in the most resistant and recalcitrant states at the present.
That was demonstrated through tests and interviews with young children where they were given choices of
The dolls.
Dolls, dark dolls, light dolls. Which one's better? Which one do you want? Which one would you like to be?
And that black child would always pick up the white doll. Why?
Why do you think?
Because they had been indoctrinated that white's right, and that's the best way to be, and white's superior to the blacks because of the place they were in life.
That hurts you even now to talk about it, doesn't it?
Yes. When I think about law school, when I think about so many things that happened to me in America, that's the idea of inferiority of African Americans to whites. The problem is that even notwithstanding what the sociologists said, most African Americans never bought into that theory. I mean, I don't know any black that played football with me or went to college with me or anything else in my whole life that ever said anything about, well, I think I'm inferior to white people. On the contrary.
Where did you go to college?
West Virginia State College, the best state. West Virginia University now, that's the best school in this country, in this part of the country.
Was it an integrated college when you attended?
No. I don't think so. Faculty was, but I don't think there were any any whites at that time. I think the whites came after I left for the Army on my second time. I had been in the Army before, and I got called back in the Army again, and white students start trickling in about 1954.
How did a black man in the early 50s become an officer in the Army?
Well, I had been in the reserves. I had been in the Army when I was 17, and I got in the reserves. And I got called back in the Korean War, and I didn't want to go. At least they didn't want me to go because they wanted me to play football. And they said the only way you can do that is take ROTC. So I went and I took ROTC. I figured, well, it's about over now. When I get out, boom. As soon as I graduated, I got this telegram telling me to report to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, to the artillery center there.
Was the Army integrated at that time?
Yes.
President Truman ordered that the Army.
And that's one of the things I think we Americans we mountaineers can be very, very proud of. A lot of us took ROTC, African Americans, males at West Virginia State. And we went to the artillery school. It's about 6 months. And if you didn't pass during a week, you had to have a score of 75. You had to go to a night class. And they were all officers. They were there from Harvard. They were there from Yale. They were from all over the country. All of us were black artillery officers, and we went to that school. And I really appreciated West Virginia. None of us ever went to school that night. The guys had master's degrees. We were all undergraduates. The ones that went to West Virginia State College, hey, I said, I thought they said I had an inferior education, but we did it, and we just didn't. And I went through with honors and everything else, and I ended up in Japan, and then ended up going from there to Seoul, Korea, and then taking a light plane and go up north, Kumwa Valley. And I was just an artillery officer, and one day the colonel called me in. He said, how many times have you been up to the top where we go and live for a week to see what the Korean people were doing? So he said, come here, Henderson, how many times have you been up? I said, I don't know, sir, 7 times. And he said, how old are you? And I said, 20, so. He said, what are you going to do when you go back? I said, well, I'm going to go to school. I'm going to go to med school, I think. And he said, we got 3 officers down there, and they have more seniority than you. He says, do you think you could be a commanding officer of a firing battery? I said, no, sir, no. And he looked at me a minute, and he said, stand up and come over here. He says, now you're a first lieutenant, and you're commanding officer of the able battery, firing battery. And the word went out like mad. They got this young black guy up there is in charge of everything, and I enjoyed it. I didn't just get it that way. That's the story I tell you, but I worked hard to be an American officer.
You had to be better, didn't you?
5 times better. When I left Japan, coming back, to the States. I was a colonel, and the two-star general came to the airport and literally begged me to stay in the Army. I was proud of that. And some of my buddies were there and witnessed it. In Japan, in Tokyo, they said, you stay in the Army, you could go straight to the top. I said, no, sir. You can go straight to the top. They said, you're young. You'll be a major at the age of 28. You're going to be a colonel. They said, you're going to the top. We've looked at you. We've followed you. I said, no, thank you. That's just the way it was. I'm not a military, but I'm proud of the 2 hitches I had.
You said you felt you got a really good education at West Virginia State.
I do, as good as anywhere.
Did you enjoy your time as an undergraduate in college?
Oh yeah, at West Virginia State, very much.
Did your teachers treat you appropriately?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Where'd you go to law school?
George Washington University.
Why?
Because I read in the paper that they never had African American to go to law school, and they were kind of proud of it or something. And I decided that that's where I want to go. So I applied after I made my decision that I want to go to law school rather than medical school. And I was accepted. I think because I was an Army officer at the time, they didn't have race or anything. I wrote a letter.
They didn't ask about your race?
Well, they did. And then it's a quirk to that. I was accepted. I came to Washington, D.C. And people at the Urban League, African Americans, they found me and asked me to come meet with them, executive director and 2 or 3 other people. And they said, how many, you've been accepted to George Washington? I said, yes. They said, what kind of student are you? I said, B. Probably B. I might get a few A's, I say, every now and then. I'd probably get C's too. I don't worry too much about it, but I can pass, you know.
Grades do not necessarily reflect the intelligence of the person
right.
receiving
Exactly.
them.
So they said, what we'd like for you to do is go to American U, or go to Howard, or go to Georgetown. I said, what? We want you to go to one of those law schools, and we'll help you get money. I said, what do you mean? He says, we know that they're going to flunk you out if you're just a B student. We want a black to go in there with IQ of 900. That literally is what they were saying. And I used the profanity, and I said, no, I'm going to George Washington. And I was there for 3 years by myself. I never had any friends. None of the white students ever interacted with me, socially, otherwise. And the African American lawyers here know that I'm the only guy that ever went to law school for 3 years, didn't have any kind of relationship with any single student. They never even talked to me for 3 years, just by myself. In the beginning, it was those days when you smoked, and I would go out and there'd be 2 or 3 white guys at a 10-minute break, smoking, and I'd smoke, and they'd get up and move. I wasn't paying any mind. It was about 4 months that I decided that every time I go where they were smoking, or even at the coffee place across the street, right down from the White House, everybody would get up and leave. And then it finally dawned on me. I talked to my wife. I said, they don't want to have coffee with me or anything. She said, well, you know what you got to do? You got to do. So for the rest of my time in law school, I was by myself. I knew they had old exams and all that. I didn't care. I just studied, and just went on. But I didn't have any friends. Nobody ever. I tried to, in the beginning, force myself just to be friends. And a side note is, in that class was, I think, 2 women, 2 white females. And I kind of watched them. They didn't do much better than me.
The law was a closed institution in those days.
Oh, yes.
Could you join the ABA, the American Bar Association, if you wanted to at that time?
I didn't have any money. I don't really know. I guess maybe so, but I was lucky just to.
We've talked in times past with Dennis Archer, who's the president of the ABA, and he's told us that it was into the 50s before a man of color would be accepted. In fact, sometimes they were searched out to see if they qualified in earlier times, qualified by reason of race.
Is that right? I really didn't know that. I thought the reason I didn't join when I first got out was I didn't have any money to join. Basically, I was a poor lawyer, you know.
Well, you came out and you started practicing law where?
Huntington.
West Virginia.
Yes. That was a tough time.
Who were your clients?
My clients were court appointments by the federal judge Watkins, which I received no pay.
But that was not because of your race. They just didn't hire court or didn't pay court appointed
Well,
attorneys a lot in
no,
those
I
days,
was the
did they?
one that was always. I was the only black there, and when the judge came, Judge Watkins came from Fairmont. His bailiff was a black guy, and he said the judge wants you, and I had to go over there and volunteer and give my services for maybe a week or two in federal court. And all the white lawyers knew when he was coming, and they'd all hide. And I ended up representing him. They were 99% white. And I worked real hard at it. It was a hard life. It was a real hard life. The only place that would serve me food in Huntington was a 5 and 10 Walgreens, and nobody else would. And I would be in a record room, and I have poor people. You didn't get any pay. You got $50, I think, to represent somebody in a murder case. Every now and then I would do some title work or something, and the lawyers there, white lawyers, they were very friendly to me, a lot of them. And I noticed after a while, when lunchtime came, about 10 minutes before lunchtime, they would all kind of sneak out. You know how the record room is in the courthouse, with the deed books and all the books. And I'd look up, and there was nobody there but me left all the time, you know. The guys would go to lunch. And then I finally dawned on me. I was real slow getting this thing, I'll tell you that right now. And they said they didn't go maybe because they didn't want to be embarrassed because nobody would serve me. So I just did the best I could. And you being an Army officer and proud and all like a mountaineer is hard, but you know, I just figured this is the system and I'm going to fight it. Ever since I was in Huntington, all of 40-some years that I practiced, my practice was probably between 92 and 5% white.
9 out of 10, better than 9 out of 10.
Yeah, I represented people. I mean, my white clients, they didn't care what it was. All they want you to do is represent them.
You did other things beyond the traditional practice of law.
NAACP, I was a state conference president for 20 years, and I was involved in civil rights litigation and also as a civil rights person for the state, African Americans in the state of West Virginia for a long, long period of time. And that included trying cases. In my capacity, for example, as a state president, we filed a lawsuit that we made a mistake. Frank Cleckley was helping me. And I was...
Frank Cleckley is a former justice of the state Supreme Court, law professor at West Virginia University, man of color.
That's right. And we decided that I couldn't be the lawyer, too. So Frank, take my name off, put Frank's name on there. You're the lawyer, I'm the lawyer, but I will be the NAACP. So we went before Judge Hayden, our dear friend who passed recently, and he said, now, you're the lawyer, Henderson. I said, yes. I said, no, I'm the client. Cleckley is the lawyer. And he got the superintendent of the schools in there, and Judge Hayden said, Mr. Henderson, and I forget now who the head of the state police was. He said, you see that room over there? He says, discrimination against African Americans as troopers and the state police, that's wrong, don't you agree? And he said, yes. He said, oh, Mr. Henderson, he agrees. He said, well, you go, the two of you go in that room and you stay as many days as you want to. Mr. Cleckley and I, we're going out and do whatever we want to do, and you all settle this case. And we went in the other room, just him and I, and we went back and forth, and I wanted a certain number, and I wanted this.
You were integrating the state police.
Yes, but the law school was there. We were ready to, Cleckley was ready to move. I mean, we'd already filed a lawsuit and everything else. So we talked back and forth about getting blacks in. And after about the second day, and Judge Hayden didn't have anything to say, but we knew that Judge Hayden was going to rule in our favor. And we knew that. We had dinner that night, and next morning we start talking again. finally we came up with a plan to integrate the state police, and we did very quickly. And over the next couple of years, we got about 12 involved in it. But it was kind of funny because I was playing, as a state NAACP president, I was a client, really, and Cleckley was a lawyer of record in the case. But a lot of cases like that, I file, and some of the cases after a while were pretty easy. In my own home county of Campbell County, I sued to desegregate the school systems, and it was a settlement of it. They were ready for somebody to sue them, and I did a lot of that kind of a thing.
What period of time are we talking about?
I would say 60s, starting in the early 60s, and integration of places to eat and things like that. We had some counties were a lot worse than others. I wasn't practicing law at the time, but one of the worst places was where I'm being interviewed today, and that was in Greenbrier County.
We're talking today at the Greenbrier Resort in White Sulphur Springs.
And that was a tough one. Thurgood Marshall, General Counsel for the NAACP, in the fall of 1994, came to Greenbrier County and for the West Virginia State NAACP. And he told them that you can win this case. I think West Virginia is going to be easy to crack. And they filed a lawsuit here. And Judge Moore, white judge, federal judge, integrated Greenbrier County right on the spot. We won the case, and there was riots and fights and prejudice and all. That was a time, the types of things that the NAACP did. But we filed a lot of lawsuits, and we did a lot of them were kind of easy to do because normally a lawyer on the other side would say, you know, it was hard for him to say that's not the law.
I think the West Virginia State National Association for the Advancement of Colored People needs to do something. I think we need a new image. I think there's a crying need for new leadership and younger people to participate in the affairs of the organization.
Thurgood Marshall, General Counsel for the NAACP, came to Greenbrier County and for the West Virginia State NAACP. And he told them that you can win this case. I think West Virginia is going to be easy to crack. And they filed a lawsuit here. And Judge Moore, white judge, federal judge, integrated Greenbrier County right on the spot. We won the case, and there was riots and fights and prejudice and all. That was a time, the types of things that the NAACP did. But we filed a lot of lawsuits, and we did a lot of them were kind of easy to do because normally a lawyer on the other side would say, you know, it was hard for him to say that's not the law.
But you had to do that.
Yes, and I enjoyed it. I sued, brought suits, and went on. And
you like to pick a fight sometimes?
Well, I remember the students at Marshall, white and black, got together, and they went to the Bailey's cafeteria, and a white girl would go in and order a hamburger, and she'd sit down, and then her black girlfriend would come in, and she'd cut the hamburger in half, and they would eat. He wouldn't try to throw them out, literally. And then the blacks went, and I told them that you have to dress nice because you want to go to this white place where hamburgers are better or whatever. And we tried that case. They got an injunction against us in the Circuit Court of Campbell County, and I tried the case about 2 days or so, and the judge ruled in our favor. And that decision was just before the '64 Civil Rights, and I couldn't have done it. Almost every judge and every lawyer in the United States would write me for a copy of his opinion, a copy of my papers. And within a week's time, the 1964 Civil Rights Act was passed. And I was real proud to be a part of it. I spent days and days on it. My total fee on that was that I think about 4 Marshall professors who were white got together and gave me a crisp $100 bill.
for all that work.
Yeah, and I think my secretary was getting $32 a week, and I gave her all of it. I gave her 3 weeks, and I ended up with $8, I think it was. I had to pay the secretary.
You know, we laugh, you laugh when you tell these stories, but these are tragedies.
Yes, yeah.
How do you stand up against things like that?
What happens is after a while, you get hate. You feel like going on the other side. You feel like violence. You see things and they hurt you so much. And they're just insignificant things. When I came back from overseas, I went to Fort Knox, Kentucky, and I knew some officers that were there, first lieutenants and captains. And they said, let's go. I was getting out of the Army. I was going to law school. And we went out that night. I think it was 3 white guys and myself. Hey, Herb, what are you going to do? I said, well, I'm going to New York. I'm going to have fun. So we had a lot of time. We talked. I met them in the Army. And we went to the airport in Louisville. And I was flying to Newark, New York, where my brother had a business, and I wanted to go there before I came to McDowell County. And they said, you want to eat? Go upstairs in the airport. I said, no, I'm happy as I can be. And we just had fun. Now, keep in mind, he's all white guys. Okay. I said to the girl at the counter there, I said, I just like a hot dog. I've been over in Japan so long. I said, just give me a hot dog. I have a uniform and all. And I was proud to be an American. And the girl said to me, we don't serve y'all. I said, beg your pardon? Said, we can't serve y'all. I said, well, make a long story short, the 3 white officers with me almost got in trouble, serious trouble, and they raised all kinds of hell and everything else, and it was just one big mess there in the airport. Everybody's looking, said, they wouldn't sell him a hot dog. Look at the ribbons he's got. I said, well, and the white guys were really doing it. I wasn't doing anything. I just want to get out of Kentucky. And I was young, and I was single. And at the time, I didn't feel like I had any real prejudice or anything else. And I got on the airport. It's Eastern Airlines. I remember like it was yesterday. And I remember beautiful stewardess come by. She's white. You know, I didn't care what she was. At that time, I'd date white, green, or anybody else. It really didn't bother. And I was shaking when I got on the plane because of what had happened, the incident and all. And I thought, God, I'm having troubles here. I don't know what to do. So she came to bring me a Coke or something. And as I said, normally I would have made a pass at her. I was a free guy, you know. And she touched me with the Coke. I said, don't you touch me. Don't you ever dream about touching me in any way. Don't look at me. And I call her a white something. And I was really, I had real crazy thoughts. When I got off the airport in New York and what I was going to do, I was almost went over because it was just so hard. And I couldn't live with it. And it's difficult for me, very, very difficult. And I had to go back to, because of my white friends, like guys like the guy that took up for me. That's the only thing that ever sold me. Because as I told my Black History students at Marshall at 13 years, I taught that, and we talked about that. And I always tell them that you black kids, I think all whites are bad, you're wrong. And I tell my white kids, I said, and same thing. You think all blacks are bad, they're not, you know, blah, blah, blah. And you asked me how it felt. It didn't feel good. It didn't feel good. And after between the time I got out of law school, before I went to law school, I came home in I think it's February and March maybe. And I decided to try to get a job in Washington, D.C. because that's where I was going to school for 4 or 5 days. And Fort Belvoir, Virginia was about 40 miles away. And I had put in for a job of what I had done and but no race was on there. And they kept calling me, Henderson, we got a job for you. We want to hire you right away. I didn't tell them I was going to law school, but I could work for 6 months. And they just worried me to death. They called and called and called. Finally, I went down there at Fort Belvoir. And the girl came out, lady came out on the desk. I said, I'm Herbert Henderson. I said, do you all know me? Because you called me 50 times. She said, you're the Herbert Henderson? Is this yours? I said, yeah, that's me. She says, oh, excuse me. So pretty soon a major came out and he looked at me. He said, are you the same, this Herbert Henderson? I said, yes, sir. I said, what's going on here? So he went back and stayed a while, and he come back and he said, we're going to get back to you tomorrow, the next day. You know me, I didn't pay it any mind whatsoever. But my chances of getting that job after they saw I was white was nil. I mean, it was horrible. Just figure out how, could you live with that?
No. And I talked to someone such as yourself, and I realize that the fact that you have survived till today with all of that distinguishes you from most of the rest of humanity in some way. You're brighter, or you're more at ease with yourself. Somehow you get to this point. And I wonder about the hundreds of thousands of other people.
Of color?
Of color.
Drop
men,
out. They
women
drop out. They drop out. They get 20 years old, and they don't get jobs in the system itself, profiling, petty arrest.
And go to prison for years.
They go to for nothing half of the time. White kid is DUI, and his dad called down there and said, Tom, hey, he's just had a little fun. Send him come on home. Well, the black kids never had that because the police and the whole system was for the controlled by the whites. Right, and so by the time the average black kid, and it's true today, I guess 20% of them have been arrested or something, just piddling stuff like that. And so they really denied an opportunity to be a part of the system. I think they drop out. My point I want to make is they go there and then they go get a job and they don't have training. And if they get a job, they're the company decides to, we got to let 5 people go, and they look at the black guy and say, oh, well, you first, you got to go. And what happens is, and there's some studies being done on it, the blacks between the ages of probably 26 and 35 drop out. They just drop out. They start working. They drink wine. They hang in the street. They do things. They just drop out. And they say, I can't make it in this world. And we don't know what percentage of African Americans have dropped out, but they're dropping out more and more and more. They're just dropping out. I can't make it. What's the use? I'm going to be a dishwasher all my life. What's the use? I don't care how good I am or what I do. I just can't make it in the system. So they're dropouts. And nobody knows how many they are. And some of them are highly educated and otherwise too, because they just can't fight the system.
Who were your role models as a child?
My school teachers, my black school teachers in McDowell County. She used to tell us and make us say it. That's long before Jesse Jackson. She said, I am somebody. And she taught us things. So you can be anything you want in this world. And she just taught us it. She just kept telling us that over and over and over. And after a while, we started believing it. What happened? Schools got integrated. The white teachers never tell the blacks that you can make it and push them and push them and push them. And they don't get that. My kids never got that. Never, any of them. They all went to school. They all went to professional school. And they all did quite well. But they got pushed at home.
They had another role model, didn't they, your kids?
Yeah, I had my wife.
And maybe you.
She's an educator, yeah. And but I think the Brown case changed America because as a result of that decision, the Congress of the United States passed the 1964 Civil Rights Act, prohibiting discrimination and travel and the buses and the airlines and the restaurants, and you could go on, public accommodations and on and on and on. That was a result of Brown versus the Board of Education. Then we had the 1965 Civil Rights Act, 1967. And then states such as West Virginia passed civil rights legislation, copying it off of the federal statutes. That is, we copied them up from, I know because we worked in it. And here again, not to try to be fair, some of our hardest workers for us, when we finally got this Civil Rights Act passed, or the West Virginia Human Rights Act voted on by the legislature, I can remember Senator Nelson. One senator I can particularly was Senator Kaufman from Charleston. And we had 3 or 4 senators and maybe a dozen people in the House. And they weren't black, they were white. And they without them, we couldn't have made it. The Women's League of Women's Voters, AFL-CIO, and just black people. And we just kept going. We had something on paper with nothing in 61, but 67, we knew we had it. And one of the senators called us, me in Huntington, and said, this case is coming before the Senate in the morning. We want, you all drove us crazy, that we want you here. I said, tomorrow morning? Yes, we want you here. We want every seat filled. And I said, what are you talking? That's what we want. I said, I'll see what I can do. I got on the phone until, I guess, 1 o'clock. Charlestown. I said, you got to come to Charleston. Just give me 1 busload of you, 1 carload. Morgantown, I called. Charleston in the morning, in the Senate. You got to be there. What are you talking about this time? I said, you got to be there. Fairmont, let's go. I remember this place here, Greenbrier County, Mr. Crump. I said, you got to be in Charleston in the morning for the vote on the West Virginia Human Rights Act. I can't. I said, yes, you can. He says, I got snow. I said, I don't care how many inches you got. You got to be here in the morning. Bluefield, Logan. I just kept calling. I said, I want you there, and I want you there an hour early before the Senate convenes. And I got there, and I saw 500 black faces. They weren't from Charleston. They were from West Virginia. I was the happiest light. We all cried. I was so happy that meant so much to them that they would get out of bed at 1 o'clock in the morning. Those are the old days, and you couldn't drive to Charleston in 2 hours in those days. And start driving to Charleston to be there and to push and pray that they would, that's what it meant to us. Our people, they cried. You asked me about it, they cried. And it was the happiest moment. It was not so much the act, but what it meant to African Americans in the state of West Virginia, whose population at that time was probably 5 or 6%. And we were just like we'd been, I guess, released from prison, just like the slaves were. I think that's how we felt about it.
A lot of the rhetoric of the civil rights movement of the early 60s was rhetoric reminiscent of the slave days. Free
no
again,
question.
Thank God Almighty, free lands.
No question. I remember trying a case for black railroad people before the Human Rights Commission, a lawyer, administrative law judge. Black firemen and conductors and engineers, the railroad, the NW Railroad, plus the union. A case was in court for 10 years. Black people, they went to the Supreme Court back and forth. Almost put me in bankruptcy because they didn't have the money. And finally, we won. Supreme Court ruled in our favor. And they wanted their jobs back. And this is the highest moment, I think, in my life in the civil rights. It's a sad one, but it's the highest one I think I ever had. And they came, and they were railroad people, okay, railroad workers. engineers and things like that. They had their Sunday suit, had the clothes on, neat, just clean, as we say. And there's a press conference and everybody there, and the guys were talking to each other and says, when I go in Monday, this white guy, old Tom Smith, and I'm going to bump him. And he said, I'll be the happiest time of my life. I will be the engineer come Monday. And they were all talking like that. And these guys, I think I had 17 of them, I think. And then they said, people asked him about settlement money. They said, forget this, you take the settlement money. She says, the state of West Virginia has recognized that I'm a man. He said, I'm going to my grave. I'm happy. This decision tells me that if I stay and persevere, you'll accept me as a human being, not because of the color I had. And this guy was like 60 years old, and the tears were pouring down his, no, you could never see anything like that. These people, law-abiding, good people, just good people, family people. They didn't know about things that they go to church, and, they're just good people. And they sat there, and they said, it's not about money. It's not about money. It's about, they felt that the case confirmed that they were human beings on an equal status with everybody else. That's what it meant. That's their way of doing it. And everybody was there. I think the only time I ever had litigation, I've tried many murder cases and everything else. I looked up and I didn't even know it, but somebody said, wipe your eyes. I said, not me. And I looked and I was crying. And it was that's the happiest moment I ever had in my life, to just watch them release themselves and be accepted as human beings rather than be a slave and rather than be different simply because the color of their skin in our country.
There is some belief, at least among the white population of West Virginia, that when the U.S. Supreme Court said integrate the schools, it was as if somebody had thrown a switch and we just integrated the schools. Was it that easy?
No, we had lots of problems. Some counties went, I think McDowell County, that was one of the bad ones. We had a lot of bad counties. We sued in Cabell. No. When we talk about civil rights, we had incidents all over. We had the Corps. We had demonstrations. There were so many things that we did back there, and I had a list of them. They would go on forever. Even in the late 60s, 80%, no, more than 80%. I've got my statistics. 80% of the hotels in West Virginia would not accept blacks. White people don't know that, even to this day.
Let's talk about affirmative action.
Well, I think affirmative action per se, a lot of people misunderstand it. Most people would like to give African Americans an opportunity to, so if I should say it, to catch up. The problem is what mechanisms are used. I've never believed in quotas. But I've never believed in just because you're one color that you should get a job over. But I think in our system, there has to be a place for people who've not had the opportunity. You got affirmative action. You and the public knows that if you've given money to Yale or Harvard over the years, your kid's going to be accepted. Isn't that true? We don't get in that way. That's the money acceptance. And we go on and we go on. I think there are different ways of doing it. But you can get the same end result. And the nasty name is quotas. I'm talking about giving an African American the extra kick that he or she needs in order to compete in the place, in the workplace, whether it's in college. I don't think so. And I don't know people who make A's in college necessarily contribute any more to our goodwill of people in this country. I mean, just a grade by itself. You understand, people have to understand, you asked a black kid in New York, where does eggs come from? The kids say, Kroger's. What do you mean, where it come from? You ask the white kid, middle class home, where do you get eggs from? What do you mean? You get them from a chicken out on a farm. That's where you get. The kid in New York's never left New York. And you can have tests. I am convinced beyond any reasonable doubt that it's a bias. And it depends on who's making the test, who's taking the test, and the material that's in the test, whether or not you make high scores. If you've been in a family, for example, where your dad's a physician and your mom's this or school teacher, and they always reading and studying, and they hear and this and that, and they get this kind of thing, and they get to 11th grade and they go college part-time and this and that. I'll tell you, you're going to be ahead. You'll be ahead on the test every time, and I don't care what color you are, you're going to be way ahead. So I don't think that by itself. I think different ways of doing it in the workforce. But I would never, in any sense whatsoever, even consider hiring, for example, a black man. Let's really put it down where it ought to be. A black man being a captain of an airline. You think I want you to make a guy a captain of one of those huge planes because he's black? That's extreme. That's an extreme, but I'm telling you, I want somebody that's qualified. And how do you qualify? You make programs and things to give that potential black pilot an opportunity to be able to do it just as well as the white fellow.
Professional schools in recent times have been grappling with the concept of affirmative action, although I don't know that they label it that way, out of a belief that sometimes you need to kick the system a little bit so that you will have some black lawyers or black physicians or whatever else it may be. Does that cause you concern that they would do that?
No, absolutely not. I don't think in America, would you like every chemist in America to be white male? In America, if you go by the test, the people, the white-oriented test that you get into college, the only people who would go to the finest schools in this country would be white males, 90%. Is that what we want in this great country of ours? Is that what we want?
Diversity has value simply because of diversity, does it not?
Yes, but everybody brings something to the table. There are all kinds of things that come to the table, whether you studied in science, or the arts, or literature. I played football, and I support it in college now, but I think a person that in the music department is just as important as the one that's in the medical department. I think that's what a great country is about, and I think that's what life's about.
Herbert Henderson, civil rights activist, attorney, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The Law Works is produced in cooperation with the West Virginia State Bar, the Mountain State Bar, the West Virginia Trial Lawyers Association, the Defense Trial Council of West Virginia, and the West Virginia University College of Law.
The Law Works is made possible by the generous support of the West Virginia State Bar, the West Virginia Trial Lawyers Association, the Defense Trial Council of West Virginia, and by ALPS, providing protection and peace of mind for West Virginia attorneys and their clients for more than 15 years, and FindLaw, offering an online directory of more than 1 million attorneys, plus self-help legal guides for consumers and businesses. Find answers, find lawyers, find law on the internet at findlaw.com.
This has been a production of West Virginia Public Broadcasting.